Hello everybody and welcome. Today I'm going to be giving you a run through on how to operate a camera through the Canon simulator online. Now if we look at our screen here, we will see all of the things that we would see on a camera. This is our scene, so we want to think of this while we look at the screen or section of the screen as sort of our viewfinder or the screen on the back of our camera. And then we have all of the settings. We have our aperture here, we have our shutter speed here, and then we have our ISO here. Now, notice how as we move our knobs either to the left or the right, we see this moving to the left and right as well. This is our exposure meter. So we always want to make sure that we have our exposure meter right in the middle. Now, also what we'll notice if we look here at the top, we have these two adjustments. We have the shutter priority, we have aperture priority, and then we are currently on manual. And I'm going to show you roughly how to use this screen here to then get the photo or the different types of photos you would want to get. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is to learn how to get a good exposure. Now, in order to get a good exposure, all you need to do is just balance your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO so your light meter is right in the middle of here at 0. So what we can do is where we are here, we'll just take our ISO and we'll just move it over to the left, and notice how it goes over to the left with us. If I go to the right, it goes to the right. We'll move it to the left at 800, and notice here the way that we have our settings, it's right in the middle. So if we have it right in the middle here, if we were to take our picture, we'd have a pretty good exposure. It's not overexposed, it's not underexposed. We can see everything that's going on, and it's just right. Now, sometimes you might want to get a sharp background and a sharp foreground. So we would want to have our pencils sharp, and then also to be able to see this jack in the box in the back here. To do that, what we're going to do is actually go to aperture priority mode. So if we know that we want to control the depth of field, we are going to use aperture priority. Now, the higher the number, the smaller the hole. The higher the number, the more of the background we'll be able to see. So the higher the number, the more of our image will be in focus. Now, on aperture and on shutter priority, the camera will automatically adjust the settings for you. So if we were to look at our shutter speed and our ISO here, if we were to go left, notice how that shutter speed changes as we change our aperture. So it kind of helps change things for us so we can make sure we get that full thing in focus. So if we wanted everything to be in focus, we'll change it to 22. We'll take our picture and notice how we see the jack in the box in the background as well as the pencils in the foreground, and everything is nice and sharp. Now, if we wanted to blur the background and the foreground, all we would need to do is leave it on the aperture priority mode and just open up that aperture to 2.8. What that's doing is giving you a larger sized hole, but with that larger hole, it starts to blur the foreground and that background. So the bigger the hole, the smaller the number, the less you'll see of the foreground and the background. So let's go ahead and take that photo, and we'll see that our jack in the box is blurry, and then also the foreground. So we have a very shallow depth of field. So the only thing that's in focus is our airplane in this marble. Now, if I wanted to capture the propeller movement, so if I wanted to make the propeller look like it was still, what I would want to do is then change my my option up here to shutter priority. So then that way I can really focus on how fast the shutter takes the picture. So if I'm trying to make the propeller look still, what I would want to do is use a fast shutter speed. So I'm going to take my shutter speed and bump it all the way up. Notice again, I'm still on shutter priority. I'm going to take my shutter speed all the way up. So when I take that photo, notice how that propeller looks like it's not even moving at all. Now, if I wanted to make the propeller still visible, but just sort of get a little bit of that motion blur, all I'm going to do is just turn this down a little bit. Now, you can also see if we look here at sort of our picture effects, we were over at 1/4000th of a second. As we bring this down, notice how we start to see sort of an example in the middle of our propeller blade. Now, I want to make sure that I don't take it all the way down, because then notice how I won't be able to see anything. So I want to get it just a little bit in between, so that way I get a little motion blur, and then take my photo. So now you can see it. I can tell that the propeller is there, and I can see some of that movement, so I know that that propeller is actually in fact moving. Now, just for laughs, let's see what happens when we take this all the way down and have a 1-second exposure. Notice what happens when I take the photo now. You can't really see the propeller at all because it's moving too fast and our shutter speed is too slow. And now let's say we wanted to have our foreground and our background blur, so have a wide aperture or a shallow depth of field, but then have a shutter speed fast enough to capture some of that motion blur. What we're going to do is just open up our aperture to 2.8. So that way I know I'm blurring that background and that foreground. And then what I'm going to do is, just like we did before, I'm going to move this up just a little bit more, just so I can get a little bit of that blur. Now notice how I'm starting to get a little underexposed here. So all I'm going to do is just take my ISO and I'm going to bump it up just a little bit to 800. And then that way, when I take that photo, I can see a little blur from the airplane propeller, but also I have the background blurred and then my foreground. So it just makes a much more dynamic and just different image. Hopefully this is helpful. You are going to have your final test in photography on this site. You will have to get a 100% on your challenge. So you're going to get one shot and you're going to take the challenge here. So if you are able to take the challenge and get a 100%, you will have nothing to worry about. If you want to practice and study for this test, all you need to do is just keep taking this challenge until you feel like you are good to go on your test next week. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will be sure to help you as soon as possible.